There it is. All right, here we are. Thank you. Richard Villasana, we are so thrilled and delighted to be able to share this time with you today on this very important day to get your book out to the world. Will you hold your book up and show the world what this is? Do no harm. The U.S. border child tragedy continues. So there's quite a, this book is startling. It's heartbreaking. There's a lot that goes into this, but you have a passion that is seldom seen in the world today to bring these children home. Let's talk about what you do in the world today.
So, I am the founder of the international nonprofit Forever Homes for Foster Kids, and we actually have two activities. The first, and what has been our primary focus, has been working with foster children. And when a child comes into the foster care industry system, agencies are moving to action to try to find a relative as soon as possible. So a child may come in, and that same day they may leave with an aunt or a grandparent. And that's always best for the child because they're with someone that they're familiar with. Now, sometimes that doesn't always happen. And when that situation is like that, where there's not a relative who's nearby to take in the child, then we do something called family finding. And it's a simple concept. You get a big list of all the relatives, all the adult cousins, the aunts, uncles, grandparents, any distant relative. You make that huge list, and then you locate those people, get their phone numbers, and then you contact them. And the idea is if you contact enough of these people, then somebody is going to step up and say, yeah, I'll take little Johnny or Maria and I'll take them in. And again, we get the child out of the foster care system into what we call kinship care. So that's the big push when it comes to foster care, getting a child in the system, but getting them out as soon as possible and to a family member. Now, sometimes
Yeah. It,
that process gets even worse. So uh, they don't have someone nearby. They may have someone who is now living outside the U.S., and that's where we come in. So there are many kids who have relatives. As you can imagine, we have people from around the world. So sometimes kids may have relatives in Europe, they may have them in Asia, and we have, you know, more than 60 million Latinos and here in the United States. So they very well may have a relative that's living in someplace south of the border. And when that happens, though, now we're talking about documents in Spanish. We're talking about people who have to read these documents, understand what they're reading, even if they speak Spanish. Doesn't mean that they can understand what they're reading, just like most of us are a little challenged to read a contract. So the same thing happens to caseworkers. And so they're not trained in that area for the most part. And they come to Forever Homes because we are specialized in that. We have been doing this kind of searching for relatives for 3 decades now. And
amazing.
yes, and we locate all kinds of relatives, including parents. Because again, we have a 50% divorce rate. So it's not uncommon for someone to have a child and something happens, and maybe their mother or father is living outside the country. And that's where we step in.
Apologize. I had a cough and it would not go away. So you give some really startling figures in your book about the the pipeline between the federal immigration and local foster care, the barriers that are being faced to reconnecting the families and these children, and what it does to be able to reunite children. And I know you must have some amazing stories about the reunification of these families. Let's talk about that and maybe share a couple of stories that have happened recently that really highlights your work in the
Oh, excellent. So you mentioned the immigration, and the book starts out talking heavily about immigration and specifically about the policy that was initiated back in 2017 called zero tolerance. And the premise of that idea was real simple. Anybody who came to the US who was from south of the border and was asking for asylum, their children were separated from the parents. Didn't matter if they had documents or not. And actually, there are parents who came through a port of entry like El Paso, San Diego. In other words, they came in just like someone else who came off a plane, and they still had their kids separated.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that was terrible. And this was something that was investigated, and this was found out years later that this had happened to people who came with the best of intentions, and yet they still had their children taken away. And for some of these
Oh, how
families,
I just can't even imagine. It would be so heartbreaking,
the heart,
scary and heartbreaking because of what happens to not just the parents but the children and where being placed. Here's a new country. Here's a you know don't know the I don't know the language. All these other things that would be they're facing, and then to be put off into foster care and how horrible that must be for them.
well, the separation alone is very horrific. And so, again, a child is removed from their parents, and there were lots of stories, all these corroborated, that a mother might be in a facility with her child. She'd be called away to answer questions, and she wasn't decided that she was someone that needed to be prosecuted. They said, okay, fine, you can go. So now she's free to go and comes back, but her child's gone, and nobody can tell her where the child has gone to. And they're in the system, and they just kind of disappeared. And so there are a lot of these problems on the immigration side. And so let me real quickly kind of paint the picture here because we're talking immigration and foster care, and so it's really important for people to understand how this works. These people would come to the US, they would ask for asylum, their children would automatically be separated from them. Parents would go into basically federal prison, and the children would go into those facilities we saw with cages. And and just to share, imagine a 5-year-old child
Mm.
who's allowed to be able to run around for only 30 minutes a day. And these are stories that we have received directly from parents about what happened to their children. Think about 30 minutes for a child to run
I can't
around
even imagine
outside.
any child being able to to manage that, let alone not having their family or anything else to go with that. You know,
Uh,
nothing
Absolutely.
familiar.
Absolutely. So
Mm.
they're in this situation. And then what the federal government did, as far as the child is concerned, is they would try to find a sponsor. Now, I write in my book that sponsor is just a fancy word for a relative in most cases. And often that relative was another parent. So the father may have come up a couple of years before, gotten settled, or the mother, and now the child is in federal care, and they will locate that mother or father who is already in the US, now undocumented, but they're here, and they would pass the child to that parent. And that's where a lot of children went, or they might have gone to an aunt, not too many grandparents or a cousin, some adult family member. So now they're with that family member. They've come through the system, they've been removed from their parent, they're now with this sponsor, family relative. Okay, here's the problem. A lot of those families, because they're undocumented, they don't have a 9 to 5 job, they don't have steady income. We've got inflation right now. Prices on apartments, have gone up by hundreds, sometimes
Extraordinary.
doubled. These people are caught in the middle of that. They don't have insurance. So all the things that happen to the people who are living on the poverty level in this country happen to these people, which means those are the people most susceptible, most likely to have their children end up in foster care. And that's what's happening. These children who are with these sponsors, things happen. Maybe the parent turns to drugs. Maybe the parent leaves, abandons their child. We've
Not
seen
able
those
to
cases.
cope with what the issues are.
Exactly. And so somehow they end up now in our foster care system. And so the second part of the book talks heavily about the foster care system because for people who are not familiar with the foster care system, it is in tatters. It has been ripped to shreds because of COVID. We had thousands and thousands of foster parents who either died or pulled back because of their health. We have just thousands of
Hmm.
grandparents who died during COVID or are unable to be with someone because of their health issues, because of immunity issues. So this whole group of people has pulled back. Every state is suffering from a lack of foster parents. And they'll add that to all these kids who are making their way into the system.
Hmm.
And back, as I said, into a system that does not have people who are trained. One of the states that I mentioned is in Illinois, and there's a statement from one of the officials who said, I could understand if we were talking about knowing Mandarin, but this is Spanish. There's no excuse for not having someone who can speak Spanish, but that's the case. There are
Right?
agencies across the country where nobody speaks Spanish. And so now what do? How do they handle these cases? And here's the crisis. They don't.
They don't.
They
And
don't.
your stats that were in the book were that there was more than 423,000, almost 444,000 in U.S. foster care children that are in foster care, and that each day 55 kids disappear from those foster homes. And it's probably higher numbers than that, but that's modest. And then you say roughly 66 foster kids will age out and be on the street tonight. Wow.
Exactly.
And that by morning they're either sex trafficked or dead.
Sex trafficked, they're homeless, or they could be dead. I mean, these are terrible outcomes for a child who one day, let's say today, they had a home. Sometime tonight, they're not going to be in that home today, those 66 kids. And tomorrow, we have no idea what could happen to them. Homeless again, they
And
could
what
be a
kind
victim
of
of crime.
kid
Hmm?
is ready to be on their own the minute they turn 18?
Nobody.
Especially when you're new to a you're to a, in a new country, or maybe you've had the worst of situations in a family and you're in foster care and not necessarily loved. How many of these kids are ready? No, I don't know. Even well-raised children are not always ready at 18, you know.
Absolutely. We have lots of kids who are staying at home into their 20s and late 20s. And
Hmm.
so And we've had a lot of people, we're very active on Facebook and social media. And so people have written in and said, I wasn't ready at 18.
Mm, not
And then,
many of us were, you know.
and that's it. Do these kids walk out of foster care and immediately have a job? No. Are they able to get a driver's license to be able to drive a car? No.
Can they afford to drive a car?
Can
You
they
know,
afford to drive a
can
car?
they
Right.
afford the food that they need? You know, afford a place to sleep? You know, all these. I mean, it just expands and expands. And so, can you share like one particular story of something that's happened recently? You know, something where you were able to get this kid into a better position.
Absolutely. And that's the idea here is that when a child is in foster care, we want to get them out of the system as fast as possible, get them with relatives. So we had a case early on. There were three sisters, and there were 4, 8, and 10. Now, one of the challenges when you have children this young is that they may know of other relatives, but that doesn't mean they have phone numbers and they have addresses. And that was the case here. These girls kept talking about having two aunts living in Chicago, and the caseworkers weren't able to find them. And so, in their searching for relatives, they ended up getting some information and some not an exact address, but they got some information that they were living in Mexico. So that's when they came to us. They said, Look, can you find these relatives? We said, Sure. And we'll do it pro bono. So we did the work. And in less than 2 weeks, we found some of the relatives. So we gave them the information. They had a phone number. So on a Saturday, the caseworker is calling down to Mexico. She's got an interpreter with her, and she gets one of the uncles on the phone. And she's talking to the uncle. And at some point, she says, "Have you ever heard of these two aunts living in Chicago?" And he says, "Wait a minute." Silence, and then this woman comes on the line, and the caseworker introduces herself and asks the question again, "Do you know anything about two aunts who live in Chicago?" She says, "Well, of course I do. I'm one of them." The two aunts were in the living room having coffee with the family. They had flown down 3 days before, were staying for the week, and that's where they were when the phone call came in.
Wow. How amazing and wow, humbling actually, and exciting at the same time.
And that's exactly the reaction of the caseworker. She says, "I've been doing this for 17 years. I've never had anything like this happen in my life." And so, of course, the aunt said, "As soon as we're back, absolutely, we'll do the paperwork." And that's where the three girls went to go live with their two aunts in Chicago. And this is something we do all the time. We found a father who was in Puerto Rico. And once he knew that his daughter was in foster care, he left Puerto Rico, came to the States, set up residency near his daughter so that he could take her in and become a father again. He had been estranged from her for years. And,
Had
some
no
people,
idea where she was or what was going on with her.
well, you have a divorce. It doesn't mean that everyone's talking to each other or
Right.
that it broke up amiably. And so, no, he had no idea. But once he found out, I mean,
Mm.
those extraordinary steps to leave, come to, I mean, just think about how people don't want to move from one point of the city to another point. He left Puerto Rico, came to the US, and, set up roots so that he could have his daughter. And
Wow.
that's the kind of results we get, whether the child is originally an immigrant or whether they're a US born child. And that's something I do want to point out. When we talk about this, a lot of people start leaning towards, oh, there are all these immigrants. Look, the vast majority of Latino children in U.S. foster care are U.S. born children to at least one U.S. born parent, maybe both. So they just happen to be Latinos. That's all.
Mm.
Just like we have people whose ancestry is Italian or French or some European country. It's the same thing for some reason, though, in this
And yet
country.
that's what our country was founded on, was, that being, they come to this country, if you do the work, you know get a job, become legal, all the things that are entered the picture. But still, you know um, there's that prejudice or whatever, and it seems so that's not what our country's supposed to be about.
No, it's not. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is that these children come into a system where the people aren't trained. The
Mm.
caseworkers don't receive a lot of training. They're overburdened. I mean, there was a case, again, that I document in the book where that caseworker had 150 cases, 150. I, that's just an
Nobody can
impossible
handle
number.
that. No,
Oh,
no. Wow. So what's your organization, Forever Homes for Foster Kids, and we have the link here down at the bottom of the screen. But you can also pick up your copy if you have not yet picked up a copy of Do No Harm. But Richard, as we continue this conversation, what is the solution? Your organization is doing as much as it possibly can, but there's got to be other things that are being set in place to make a difference. What in your perspective is the right thing to happen?
there are three things that we need in the foster care system to help all the children, no matter what their background, to have a better life. And number one is we have to have adequate budgets. You know, foster care is not a situation where we can have put in just all kinds of children, huge numbers, and keep the budget the same. That just doesn't make any sense. It's not a sponge. It can't just absorb all these children without having adequate funding. And that's a big problem we have. So that particular activity, as far as government, can act the way government is, which is if we say we need $10 million this year and we only spend 9.7, you take away part of our budget for next year. We can't do that because next year we're still probably going to need that 10 million. We may not
That
spend it
and
all,
more.
but we
That and
might
more.
need more, right?
Yeah.
And so we need adequate budgets, and they need to change how they do that reimbursement, setting up the budgets for the following year. So that's number one. Right there, that would be huge. Number two, there has to be adequate budgets so that we can afford to train these people. We have got people coming in. We don't have enough staff, number one, for caseworkers. They're not getting trained. We don't have the funding for those caseworkers to work with foster parents. So people who would come into the system to be foster parents who have questions aren't getting their needs met. They're frustrated. They're leaving. I hear this every day from people. I'd like to adopt, but the process is so long. I'd like to adopt. I can't get a phone call. I'm waiting to be approved. All this is because of budget and personnel. So, adequate budgets, we need enough caseworkers to be trained because the better trained, the faster they can do their job, the faster things move. And then number three is accountability because we don't want to just throw money at a system and not know that it's functioning properly. And we have people doing, granted, because of this lack of education, but there are some people who should not ever be next to a child. They
No,
have no
that's right.
business being
Right.
interacting with children or families. They're just not the right people.
Right.
And we need managers who will be accountable. We need government to be checking on them, the watchdog organizations, to make sure that the millions of dollars that are being spent well. And that's not happening.
Well,
And this,
the training itself for the foster care, those that are the working in that system, the training is huge, but the pay, how much are they being paid to do a job well done? To really be compensated to make it feel like they're worth they're honored and respected for the work that they do.
the pay, and that is an aspect that we don't spend a lot of time on, but I have seen some pay that's over $100,000. Now, that could have been for a supervisory position, could have been someone who had a master's in social work. So there's a lot of variables in there,
Yes.
but it doesn't matter how much you're getting paid. If you've got 70 cases, you're failing. And nobody wants to be in a situation where they feel like they're failing, especially children. So
Mm.
there's this enormous stress on these caseworkers. And that's something that in writing the book really came to light that it's not, for the most part, people who don't care. It's people who just simply have too much work and they're having to make choices. Do I not see the child today or do I do my paperwork? Because I have to do my paperwork so that we can get things moving for this child. Do I go to court? Well, of course I do. And that means now I don't get to see another child. And they're having to make these very terrible decisions because there's just not enough staff. And so you have turnover rates of up to 70% happening here, burnout.
Well, they
And
can't take the stress there. I mean,
no,
I'm sure their own health is starts suffering just because they can't take the huge amount of stress that that entails.
absolutely. This is a serious problem in every state when it comes to foster care. And again, all those things that are happening to adults directly impact the child. The
Yes.
child being kept safe, the home being inspected. This is where we see rises in abuse because no one's coming in to check to see that the child is being cared for, specifically to look at what's happening with the child. And so you put it all together, it's a terrible system in the sense that it's not getting enough budget, it's not getting enough training. We don't have enough staff. That would be solved again with the budget, and we don't have accountability either from government or even management checking up to make sure that these problems get taken care of. If this was a business and we have a slow line trying to check out, guess what? Management jumps in and opens another line. They do something, they put in more stalls, they get more staff. That's not happening in foster care. And so we can't be doing this to our children that people say are our future,
Hmm.
that children are our most important commodity, are the most important of who we have, and they're the most vulnerable.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so this is why it's such a terrible situation, whether that child is born in the US or comes in through the federal system and ends up over in county foster care. They're now in a system that just is not prepared.
Not equipped. Not
No,
equipped for it.
no, it's not.
Wow. Well, the biggest thing is that these children are the future, and if they're without the proper love, the proper training, the things that they need the most, they'll never be able to be the leaders that they were meant to be. And so it just goes on and on and on because of what the way this whole system is. And so the amazing part about all of this is the work that you're doing, and but the awareness needs to be really put out there, because there's so many of us that would never know that this issue really exists. We're all busy in our own little worlds of doing our own little things, and we don't understand the full impact of what's truly happening. And so my hat's off to you. There's a lot of us, our hats are off to you. Your book has many, many people that are in a position to understand what is going on, who have supported you through this. They've written fabulous endorsements of you and your work. And you're in the media. You're doing a lot of the things the right way, and a pretty amazing, wonderful job at that. But for those that are listening or will listen or pick up a copy of your book, what would you like to see the most out of this whole huge amount of work that you put into getting this book out to the world?
Well, everything starts with education. If people don't know about a problem, then we don't get excited or we don't get frustrated, we don't get angry. And we need more emotion and passion to come to foster care. We need people to be thinking about these children. And so that starts with education. That's why I wrote the book, so that it could pull the pieces together, not only from what's happening with children on the immigration side, but ultimately to our children in foster care. And so that they could learn a little bit more and see that there's a need for everyone and everyone can help somehow. I get this question all the time. I can't be a foster parent. I'm just not in a position to adopt. And I tell them, okay, support a nonprofit that's working in foster care. Become a CASA, someone who gets trained and is able to go to court and for a specific child and to support that child. If that's too much, donate. That's what people do. They donate money, they donate time. I have lots of volunteers. Certainly we're happy for people to donate to our nonprofit. Like any nonprofit, we always need funding. And that's one way that people can help, to let us do the work on their behalf. And by buying the book, by the way, part of the proceeds will go to fund the nonprofit to allow us to take on more foster children cases. So, purchasing this book will make a difference because we have about an 84% success rate of finding relatives and getting these children reunited with those relatives. And let me explain that statement real quickly. A lot of people think, oh, so you have a child that's in the US, you find their relatives in Guatemala, and we're going to ship them. No, I have not worked a case where those children have left the country because those relatives, just like what those three girls, they know of relatives living in the US, and that's where the children go. There's
Hmm.
almost always a relative in the US where the children can go and they can stay. So that's number one. And the other thing is, this book ends on a note of hope. Look, there are thousands and thousands of people who, despite everything I said, are still working in foster care. They're still showing up every day. They want to be foster parents. They're adoptive parents. They are caseworkers. God bless every one of them because they are there because they are dedicated to
The
helping a
goodness of their
child.
heart.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. And there's a lot in foster care that does work. So
Right.
this is not a throw everything out and start from scratch. Does it need help? Yes, but it doesn't matter unless you have enough budget, training, and accountability. You get those three things going, and part of that training is what I do. Knowing how to find family members and then having a system that will work with family members, will help the grandparents get the children, will help that aunt who lives in another state have the children and not fight them, which is
Right.
one of the problems we have right now. So at the end of the day, it's about they can get the book, they'll be helping a foster child, they'll be able to learn more about the foster care system and see ways, because I list that, how can they help? And it could be something they could do in 1 minute that they could help and make a difference. And that's the bottom line.
Don't you also have a program for donating automobiles?
Yes, we do. People can donate their used cars. We have that program. Uh, Through Facebook, they can do fundraisers where they can share that with their friends, and that has been really helpful. And so there are many ways that people can help to provide either in kind supplies, products, or cash donation or volunteer. Have lots of volunteers helping. So there are many, many ways that people can be involved and not have to be on the sidelines.
Very good. So for anybody listening, there's all these links on the bottom of the screen. They'll click right into even after this presentation is over, you'll be able to have it. If you click them now and even go back and take a look and from Forever Connect with Foster Home, Forever Homes for Foster Kids on Facebook, on their website at foreverhomesforfosterkids.org, and be sure and pick up from the first bright yellow box there. Be sure and pick up a copy of this book, and not only pick up a copy of this book, but share this book with somebody you know. It will make a difference, because awareness is the biggest thing. Making people aware, letting people know that there is an issue and what do we do about it. So our hats are off to you, Richard, for for the work that you do in the world. You do amazing work, and it's so important in this world. And thank you for your contribution to our world today.
Well, you're very welcome and thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you. And what a beautiful, um, you know, conversation we've had here. I'd like to see it progress on. We have a lot of contacts. I've had a lot of great response just from the emails that went out today. So that there's a lot of people saying, "Wow, I'm sharing it with this person. Thank you for for getting this book out." So this is pretty amazing. So let's continue this amazing work. And thank you.
You're so welcome.